Imagine this. You're the owner of a high-end, luxury clothing brand. You've built it from the ground up, poured in years of hard work, sweat, and sacrifice to create something special. This isn't just a store, it's your dream brought to life, a symbol of success and perseverance. But then, one ordinary afternoon, you walk into your own store, and instead of being treated with the respect you've earned, you're faced with humiliation. The very people who should be supporting you, lifting you up, are the ones pulling you down. What would you do in that situation? Today's story is about a man who experienced just that, something no business owner should ever have to face. A black luxury clothing brand owner, proud of what he's achieved, enters his own store one day, only to be humiliated by someone who should know better. The events that unfold next will leave you speechless and questioning everything about how we view success, status, and respect. It all started like any other day. The owner, a man who had put his heart and soul into making his brand a symbol of excellence, was headed to his store for a surprise visit. He was excited to check on how things were going, perhaps even connect with a few loyal customers. He walked through the front door, expecting smiles and admiration from his employees and the people browsing the racks of finely crafted luxury pieces. But what happened instead shocked him to his core. The moment he stepped inside, something felt off. There was no warm greeting, no acknowledgement of his presence. Instead, a young employee, who had clearly just started working there, glanced at him, her expression hard and dismissive. She seemed to size him up in an instant, making assumptions without knowing who he really was. "Excuse me, can I help you?" she asked, her tone clipped, as if she had already decided that he didn't belong. The owner, still calm and collected, smiled and said, "Actually, yes. I'm here to see how things are running." But before he could explain further, the employee cut him off. "This is a high-end store," she said with a sneer. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Now imagine that being questioned in your own store, in front of customers, by someone who didn't even recognize the very person who created the brand they were working for. The other customers started to glance over, curiosity piqued by the tension building in the room. The owner's heart sank. He wanted to reveal who he was, to put an end to this embarrassing situation, but something held him back. Maybe it was the shock of being treated this way, or maybe it was something deeper, a sense of frustration that this could even happen, despite all he had accomplished. He stood there, his mind racing. Should he call her out on the spot? Or should he let this play out, just to see how far it would go? As he considered his options, the employee continued. At that moment, the owner was faced with a choice: reveal his identity and end the humiliation right there, or stay quiet and observe how deep this prejudice really ran. What happens next will not only shock you, but also expose a hard truth about how people can still judge others based on appearances, even in spaces where success and status should speak for themselves. Stay tuned for the rest of the story, because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. What started as a simple visit to his own store turns into a powerful lesson about respect, ignorance, and what it really means to succeed in a world that still holds on to outdated views. So what would you do if you were in his shoes? Would you speak up, or would you let the moment unfold? Keep watching to find out. The tension in the store hung in the air like thick fog. The owner stood there, quietly observing the scene, feeling a wave of emotions wash over him. He couldn't believe this was happening, not in his own store, where he had put everything on the line to build a brand that reflected elegance, sophistication, and inclusivity. He had envisioned this space as a haven for people who appreciated fine craftsmanship, regardless of who they were or where they came from. But now, here he was, being made to feel like an outsider in a place that was supposed to be a symbol of his success. He stayed silent, still not revealing who he was, but inside, his thoughts raced. How could this employee be so quick to judge him, based on nothing more than appearances? He was dressed well, though perhaps not in the way most people expected of a luxury brand owner. But did that matter? Should it matter? The irony wasn't lost on him. The very store he had created to break stereotypes was now a place where he was being stereotyped. The employee continued to hover near him, her expression unchanged, still convinced that he didn't belong. She glanced over at a couple of other staff members who had been busy helping customers. They caught her look, and one of them, a manager by the look of her, walked over, curious but cautious. "Is everything all right here?" the manager asked, eyeing the situation. She didn't know who the owner was either. It wasn't surprising. The owner had always kept a low profile, preferring to let his work and his brand speak for itself. He hadn't plastered his face all over billboards or taken to social media for attention. He believed in the power of quiet, steady excellence. But right now, that anonymity was backfiring. The younger employee spoke up quickly, her voice taking on a sharper tone. "This man seems lost," she said with a shrug, as if that was explanation enough. "I don't think he's here to shop." The owner could feel eyes on him now, customers glancing over from the racks, some with curiosity, others with judgment. This was his moment to speak up, to end the misunderstanding. But something in him held back. Maybe it was a mix of pride and frustration, or maybe he wanted to see how far this would go. How long would they continue treating him this way without realizing who he was? The manager shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of what was happening. "Sir, if you're looking for something specific, I can help you," she said, her tone more neutral, though there was still a layer of polite distance. The owner nodded, his mind still working through the layers of the situation. "I'd actually like to know how the store is doing today," he said calmly, not giving too much away. The younger employee narrowed her eyes slightly, as if trying to make sense of his words. "Like I said," she repeated, "I don't think there's anything for you here." The owner bit back a sharp retort. He wasn't here to argue. But the words stung. How many times had he heard those same words, or something like them, throughout his life? Doors closed because of assumptions. Opportunities lost because someone decided he didn't belong before even giving him a chance. And now, even at the height of his success, he was still facing the same old judgments. He looked around the store, his eyes lingering on the details he had painstakingly chosen: the custom design displays, the rich colors, the carefully curated collection of clothes. This place was his pride and joy, yet at that moment, it felt foreign, like he no longer had a place in the world he had built. Just then, a familiar face walked into the store. It was one of the brand's top clients, someone who had been a loyal customer from the early days. She immediately spotted the owner and smiled warmly, walking over to greet him. "Oh, it's so good to see you," she exclaimed, her voice carrying across the store. "I was just thinking about you the other day. This place looks fantastic." The younger employee froze, her eyes darting between the client and the man she had just dismissed. The manager too seemed to falter, realizing that something wasn't quite adding up. The owner smiled back at the client, grateful for the brief moment of relief from the mounting tension. But the damage was done. The look on the employee's face said it all. She was starting to piece together that the man she had been so quick to judge was not just any customer. But still, the owner didn't say anything. He didn't want to take the easy way out by leaning on his status to end the awkwardness. This wasn't about proving himself to them, it was about something much bigger. How many other people had been treated like this in his store without him ever knowing? How many had walked away feeling less than because someone made assumptions based on their skin color, their clothes, or how they carried themselves? The client, oblivious to the tension, chatted away, complimenting the latest collection and talking about an upcoming event she was excited to attend. The owner nodded along, but his mind was elsewhere, still processing everything that had happened in those few short minutes. As the client moved on to browse the racks, the manager stepped forward, looking nervous now. I didn't realize," she stammered, clearly unsure of what to say. The younger employee, who had been so confident just moments before, was now silent, her face pale. The owner looked at them both, still not revealing his identity. "It's all right," he said quietly. But it wasn't all right. Not really. He glanced around the store again, taking in the faces of the other customers who had witnessed the exchange. Some had gone back to their shopping, but others were still watching, their curiosity piqued. The owner could feel the weight of their gazes, but he remained calm on the outside, even though inside, a storm was brewing. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about something bigger, a problem that went far beyond the walls of his store. He had worked so hard to create a brand that represented more than just fashion. It was supposed to be a symbol of empowerment, of breaking boundaries, of redefining what luxury could look like. But now he realized that even within the space he had built, those old boundaries still existed. As the manager and the employee stood there, clearly uncomfortable, the owner made a decision. He wasn't going to let this moment pass without addressing it. But how? Should he call them out publicly, or should he handle it in a different way? He took a deep breath, still not giving away who he was, and turned toward the door. "I'll be back," he said simply, leaving the tension hanging in the air as he walked out. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot. And what happened next would be a turning point, not just for him, but for everyone involved. But for now, the mystery remained. How would he choose to handle the situation? Would he confront the prejudice head-on, or would he find a quieter way to make his point? Stay tuned for the next part, because the lessons that come from this moment will shock you in ways you might not expect. What happens when the truth finally comes out? How will the staff react when they realize who they've been talking to? And most importantly, how will the owner use this experience to reshape the culture of his store, his brand, and the world around him? Don't miss the next part of this powerful story. Trust me, it's only just getting started. ASS. The owner stepped out of the store. The cool air hit him, but it did little to calm the fire brewing inside. He had always believed in letting his work speak for itself, that success was the best way to silence doubt. But now, confronted by blatant disrespect in a place he had created, that belief felt thin, fragile even. He paced back and forth outside, wrestling with how to respond. Part of him wanted to storm back in, reveal who he was, and watch the shock and regret wash over the employees' faces. Yet another part of him knew that wasn't the solution. He wasn't looking for an apology, he was looking for change. As he stood there, lost in thought, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down and saw a message from a friend, someone who had been with him through the early struggles of building the brand. They were supposed to meet for lunch later, but that seemed irrelevant now. Still, the text gave him a moment of clarity. He knew he couldn't let this go, but he had to handle it carefully, strategically. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked back into the store. The atmosphere inside had shifted slightly. The manager and the young employee were talking quietly, and the customers who had noticed the earlier tension seemed to sense something was still unresolved. As the owner re-entered, the manager looked up, startled, clearly unsure of what to expect next. He walked over to the counter, his face calm, but his eyes sharp. "I'd like to speak to the store manager, please," he said, his voice steady. The manager hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I'm the manager," she said, though her confidence had clearly been shaken. The young employee stood off to the side, her arms crossed, trying to look busy but clearly aware of the weight of the moment. The owner glanced over at her before returning his gaze to the manager. "I think we need to have a conversation," he said, his voice low but firm. The manager nodded again, leading him to a more private corner of the store. The other employees pretended not to notice, but it was clear that everyone was paying attention. The tension in the air was palpable, the kind of silence that made every sound seem louder than it was. The owner knew that whatever he said next could define how the situation would unfold, but he was still holding back, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. As they reached the back of the store, the manager gestured for the owner to sit, but he remained standing. He could feel the pressure building inside him, the weight of years of pushing against invisible barriers. He had faced subtle and overt discrimination before, but experiencing it in the space he had built was different. It was more personal, more painful. "Before we go any further," he began, his voice controlled but firm, "do you know who I am?" The question hung in the air. The manager's face faltered for a second, confusion flickering across her expression. She shook her head slowly, clearly unsure where this was going. The owner could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the tension building as she tried to piece together what she had missed. He sighed softly, still not revealing everything, but giving her enough to realize the gravity of the situation. "I'm the owner of this store," he said, his words deliberate. "I created this brand, and I've worked for years to make this place what it is today." The manager's eyes widened in shock, her face draining of color. For a moment, she was speechless, and the silence between them grew even more uncomfortable. The young employee, who had been keeping her distance, suddenly looked over, realizing what had just been said. The weight of her earlier actions seemed to hit her all at once. I didn't know," the manager stammered, her voice shaky. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." The owner nodded, though he didn't smile. He wasn't here for apologies, not the hollow kind that came after someone realized they had messed up. He was here for something deeper. "That's the problem," he said, his tone serious but controlled. "You didn't know. And because you didn't know, I was treated like I didn't belong in my own store." The young employee took a hesitant step forward, her face pale, clearly regretting her earlier attitude. "I didn't mean to," she began, but the owner raised a hand to stop her. "I'm not interested in excuses," he said firmly, though his voice remained calm. "What I am interested in is understanding how this could happen here, how someone could be judged so quickly, dismissed so easily, without anyone asking questions or giving them the benefit of the doubt." The manager nodded, her hands wringing nervously. "You're right. I should have. We should have handled this differently," she said, her voice wavering. But the owner wasn't done. His mind was racing, thinking not just about what had happened to him, but about the countless others who might have been treated the same way, people who didn't have the luxury of walking back in as the owner. How many potential customers had walked out of his store feeling disrespected, unwelcome, all because of how they looked or what they wore? "I want to make something very clear," he said, his voice steady but firm. "This isn't just about me. I'm the owner, yes, but I shouldn't have to announce that to be treated with respect. No one who walks through these doors should be made to feel like they don't belong, whether they're a millionaire or someone just window shopping." The manager nodded vigorously, clearly embarrassed and unsure of what to say. "We'll do better," she promised, her voice small. "I'll make sure this never happens again." But the owner wasn't satisfied with promises. "Doing better starts with understanding why this happened in the first place," he said. "This store was built on the idea of inclusivity, of redefining what luxury means. It's supposed to be a place where everyone feels welcome, where quality and style speak louder than appearances. But today, that wasn't the case." The manager looked down, her face flushed with shame. The young employee remained silent, clearly shaken, realizing just how wrong she had been. The owner could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them all, but he still hadn't reached the climax of what he needed to say. He could sense that they were waiting for him to forgive, to move on, but he wasn't ready to give them that release yet. This wasn't just about making them feel better, it was about ensuring that this moment wasn't forgotten, that it left a mark strong enough to lead to real change. And as the owner stood there, feeling the tension grow to its peak, he knew the next step he took would define not only how the store operated, but how his brand stood up to the values he had built it on. He wasn't just about to let things go. Something more had to happen. Something that would ensure this moment wasn't just a brief blip, but a turning point. But how? How could he make sure that what happened today wouldn't happen again, not just in his store, but anywhere? As the tension thickened in the air, the owner remained silent for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle in. The manager stood there, fidgeting nervously, and the young employee, who had once been so dismissive, now seemed to shrink under the gravity of her mistake. The owner could feel their discomfort, but that wasn't enough. This wasn't about them feeling guilty for a few minutes. It was about confronting a deeper problem, one that had been bubbling beneath the surface for far too long. Just as he was about to continue, the door to the store opened again, and in walked someone else. The staff turned, their relief momentarily visible, probably hoping the arrival would break the tension. But instead, the atmosphere shifted in a way none of them expected. A man dressed sharply in a tailored suit strode in, his presence commanding attention. He was a familiar face, a representative from one of the major investors in the brand. Someone with significant influence, though he often operated behind the scenes. His entrance was sudden, and from the way he scanned the room, it was clear he had sensed something was off. The staff immediately straightened up, as if hoping his arrival would signal the end of the uncomfortable conversation. But instead of diffusing the situation, the arrival of the investor added another layer of complexity. He didn't just walk in for a casual visit. He had heard whispers, seen posts on social media, about a confrontation happening in the store. Unbeknownst to the owner or the staff, a few customers had taken out their phones during the earlier exchange, snapping photos and videos, and the story was already spreading. And now, the investor was here to find out what was going on. He approached the owner directly, his tone professional but laced with urgency. "I heard there was a situation," he said, glancing between the owner and the manager. "Is everything all right?" The owner stayed quiet for a moment, sensing that the stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just about a personal experience anymore. This was starting to gain attention beyond the walls of the store. The idea of his brand being at the center of a controversy was the last thing he wanted, especially when it threatened to overshadow everything he had worked for. Yet, at the same time, this was an opportunity. An unexpected twist in the story that gave him a platform to address the very issues he had been wrestling with since the moment he walked in. "Everything isn't all right," the owner finally said, his voice calm but firm. "In fact, what happened here today reveals something that goes much deeper than anyone expected." The investor raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing the gravity of the situation. The manager shifted uncomfortably again, her eyes darting between the two men, while the young employee stood frozen, not daring to speak. The owner continued, now addressing the investor directly. "I walked into my own store today and was treated like I didn't belong. Not because of anything I said or did, but because of assumptions made about me based on nothing more than appearance." His words were sharp, cutting through the room. "And if it can happen to me, the person who built this brand from the ground up, how many others have experienced the same thing?" The investor's expression tightened, but he remained quiet, clearly understanding the seriousness of the moment. He glanced around the store, taking in the faces of the employees, who now looked as if they wished they could disappear. The weight of the accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. But just when the tension seemed to reach its peak, another twist revealed itself. A voice from the back of the store, low but clear, broke the silence. "I've seen it happen before." Everyone turned, eyes landing on one of the other customers who had been quietly watching the whole thing unfold. She was a regular, someone who had frequented the store over the years, but had never spoken out about anything like this before. Her expression was serious, her voice steady as she stepped forward, addressing not just the owner, but the room as a whole. "I've been coming here for a while," she said, "and I've seen other people treated the same way. Customers judged before they even get a chance to shop. I never said anything, but now." Her voice trailed off for a moment, before she gathered herself and continued, "Now I think it's time I do." The manager's face went pale, and the young employee's eyes widened in shock. The owner, on the other hand, felt a mix of emotions. He had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed by a customer, a loyal one, that hit him harder than he expected. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Not just awkward or uncomfortable, but heavy with the weight of a problem that had been ignored for too long. The investor, still standing beside the owner, seemed to realize this was no longer a simple misunderstanding. This was a systemic issue, something that had been festering beneath the surface and was now threatening to burst wide open. And just like that, the stakes rose even higher. The owner, still processing everything, turned back to the manager. "This isn't just about one mistake," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "It's about the culture of this store, of how people are treated when no one thinks they're important. And that needs to change." The manager nodded, her face flushed with embarrassment and guilt. "I understand," she said quietly, though it was clear she was overwhelmed by the sudden shift in the situation. But the owner wasn't done. He turned to the investor, his gaze steady. This brand was built on values that go beyond luxury and exclusivity. It was built to represent something bigger, something more inclusive. And if that's being lost here, then we need to fix it. The investor nodded slowly, clearly understanding the importance of what was happening. He had come to the store, expecting to handle a minor incident, but now he realized it was much more than that. The future of the brand, its reputation, its identity, was at stake. The owner took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The second plot twist had come unexpectedly, but it had revealed something crucial. This wasn't just about his personal experience anymore. This was about the soul of the brand itself. And now, with more eyes on the situation than ever before, The pressure was mounting to handle it in a way that would resonate far beyond the walls of this store. The room remained tense, everyone waiting for the owner's next move. He knew whatever came next would be crucial. How he chose to respond, how he chose to confront the issues now laid bare before him, would shape not only the future of his store, but also the future of his brand and the trust of the people who had supported it. But as the story unfolded, there was still one more twist waiting to be revealed. Something that would push the conflict even further, leaving everyone on edge, unsure of how it would all end. And just like that, the room stood on the brink of the climax, the resolution still just out of reach, as the suspense continued to build toward the breaking point. The tension in the store felt almost unbearable, with everyone waiting for what the owner would do next. The weight of the moment, the multiple layers of conflict now exposed, made it clear that something had to change. As the owner stood there, reflecting on the words from the customer who had spoken up, he realized this wasn't just about fixing a problem in one store. This was a wake-up call for his entire brand. He looked at the manager, then at the young employee, and finally back to the investor. "If this is happening here," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "then it's probably happening elsewhere. This isn't just about today. This is about how we've been doing things, and that needs to change starting now." The investor nodded, clearly prepared to support whatever the owner decided. The store manager, though visibly shaken, looked determined, as if she was finally understanding the magnitude of the situation. "I'm going to take responsibility for this," the owner continued. "I've allowed my brand to grow, but I've been too hands-off in the day-to-day operations. That changes today. Every store will be re-evaluated. Every employee retrained. We're going to make sure that this place truly represents what I built it to be, a brand where everyone feels welcome, no matter who they are." His words hung in the air, resonating not just with the staff, but with the few customers who had remained to watch the events unfold. There was a sense of resolution, a feeling that things would be different moving forward. But just when it seemed like the climax had been reached, the final twist appeared: a phone call that would change everything. The owner's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number. Normally, he wouldn't answer in the middle of such a serious moment, but something compelled him to take the call. He held up a hand, signaling to the others to give him a moment, and answered. "Hello," he said, his tone cautious. "Is this the owner of the store?" A voice on the other end asked. There was something strange about the tone, a mixture of authority and concern. "Yes, it is," he replied, his curiosity piqued. The voice continued, "I'm calling from one of your other flagship locations. We've had an incident that you'll want to be aware of." The owner's heart sank as he listened. Another store, one in a completely different city, had just experienced a very similar situation. A high-profile customer, someone influential in the fashion world, had walked into the store and been treated disrespectfully. And, just like in this store, the incident was starting to spread on social media, rapidly gaining attention. He closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of what he was hearing almost too much to process. This wasn't just a one-off issue. It wasn't just about this particular store or a few misguided employees. It was systemic. Something within his brand, the very company he had built from the ground up, was broken, and it was now spiraling out of control. He hung up the phone, his mind racing. Everyone in the store looked at him expectantly, waiting to hear what had happened. The owner took a deep breath, his emotions swirling inside him. He had built this brand to be different, to stand for something more, but now it was clear that somewhere along the way, things had gone off track. "The same thing just happened at another one of our stores," he said quietly, his voice heavy with disbelief. The manager's eyes widened, and the investor's expression darkened. The young employee, who had been so dismissive earlier, looked utterly shocked. This was bigger than anyone realized. "I can't fix this with just words," the owner admitted, his voice raw. "We need a complete overhaul of how we train, how we communicate, how we think about luxury. Because this isn't what we're supposed to be about." The investor stepped forward, finally speaking after what felt like an eternity of silence. "We'll stand by you," he said, his voice firm. "But you're right. This needs to be handled carefully. We're talking about the reputation of the entire brand. We need to move quickly before this escalates any further." The owner nodded, knowing the truth of those words, but feeling the enormity of the task ahead. His brand, the very thing he had poured his heart and soul into, was now at a crossroads. The incidents at both stores weren't just isolated events, they were symptoms of a deeper issue. And unless he acted fast, the damage could be irreversible. But just as he was preparing to take drastic action, something unexpected happened. One of the customers, the woman who had spoken out earlier, approached him. "I know this is a difficult moment," she said gently, "but I just want you to know that what you're doing right now, owning up to the problem, is the most important step. Not many people in your position would do that." Her words were like a lifeline, a reminder that even in this chaotic moment, there was a path forward. The owner smiled weakly, grateful for the unexpected support. "Thank you," he said softly. I want this brand to mean something, to stand for something real." "And it still can," she replied. "But you have to make sure everyone involved believes in that vision too." Her words echoed in his mind as he turned back to the manager and the investor. "This is what we're going to do," he said, his voice stronger now, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose. "We're going to issue a public statement, acknowledging what happened and apologizing to anyone who has been affected. We'll also announce immediate changes to how we operate, starting with new training and policies that ensure no one is treated unfairly in our stores again." The investor nodded in agreement, clearly relieved that the owner was taking decisive action. The manager, though still shaken, looked as if she was ready to make things right. The owner glanced around the store one last time, feeling the weight of the moment. He knew that this wasn't the end of the journey, far from it. The real work was just beginning. But for the first time since he had walked into his store earlier that day, he felt like there was a way forward. As the staff began to implement his new directives, the owner stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The weight of what had happened still lingered, but there was a small sense of relief. The crisis wasn't over, but he had taken the first step in addressing it head-on. And just as he was about to re-enter the store, his phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from a well-known fashion influencer who had just posted about the incident at the other store. The story was spreading faster than he could have imagined, but instead of panic, he felt a strange calm wash over him, because this was his brand. And now, more than ever, he was ready to fight for it. With a deep breath, he walked back inside, ready to face whatever came next. The owner stepped back into the store, feeling the weight of everything that had happened over the past few hours. He glanced around, noticing the uneasy energy among the staff, the quiet conversations between the remaining customers, and the investor watching from a distance. The tension was palpable, but underneath it, there was a sense of resolution forming. It was as if everyone present understood that what had happened today had revealed more than just a series of unfortunate events. It had exposed something deeply wrong within the brand's culture. He moved toward the center of the store, where the young employee still stood, visibly shaken. The manager, who had been trying to keep her composure, approached him cautiously, as if awaiting a final judgment. The owner had come in expecting a routine visit, but now everything had changed. The stakes had never been higher. The reputation of his brand, his life's work, hung in the balance. But something inside him had shifted. Instead of anger, he felt a strange clarity. He knew what he had to do. "We're going to fix this," the owner said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "But we're not going to fix it by sweeping it under the rug or blaming a few people. This is bigger than just one incident or one store. What happened here today reflects a problem with how we've been operating, how we've been thinking. That ends now." The manager looked at him, her expression a mix of shame and hope. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I know I made a mistake. I know I should have handled it differently." The owner nodded, acknowledging her admission. "We all made mistakes. But it's not about assigning blame anymore. It's about changing the way we do things. We can't treat people based on assumptions or judgments. That's not what this brand stands for, and it's certainly not what I built it to be." As he spoke, the other employees gathered around, listening intently. Even the customers, those who had stayed to witness the unfolding drama, were paying close attention. The air was thick with anticipation, as if everyone was waiting for the moment when things would finally turn. But just as the owner felt like he was starting to take control of the situation, his phone buzzed again. He hesitated, glancing down at the screen. It was a message this time, from a media outlet. The story about the incident in the store had already gone viral. Photos and videos taken by customers earlier had been shared across social media platforms, and now news sites were picking it up. The headlines were sensational: luxury brand CEO humiliated at his own store, and racial bias exposed in popular fashion chain. His heart sank. The situation had escalated far beyond the walls of this store, and now the entire world was watching. He knew this wasn't just a brand issue anymore. It had become a public relations nightmare. His mind raced as he tried to process the implications. How could this have spiraled so quickly? How was he going to manage the fallout? The investor, who had been quietly observing the entire situation, approached him with a look of concern. "This is getting out of hand," he said, his voice low but firm. "If we don't control the narrative now, we could be looking at serious damage to the brand. This could destroy everything." The owner nodded, fully aware of the gravity of the situation. But instead of panicking, he felt a strange sense of resolve. This was the moment that would define his legacy, not just as a businessman, but as a person. He had a choice. He could either try to minimize the damage, control the story, and protect his company, or he could confront the issue head-on, acknowledging the flaws and taking responsibility. "I'm not going to hide from this owner," said firmly, looking directly at the investor. "We can't spin our way out of this. We need to own it, acknowledge what went wrong, and show people that we're committed to change." The investor hesitated, clearly unsure about this approach. "Are you sure? This could be risky. If we admit to too much, we could lose customers, investors, partnerships." "I'd rather lose all of that than lose my integrity," the owner interrupted, his voice resolute. This brand was built on the idea that luxury doesn't have to mean exclusion. We promise something better, something more inclusive. If we can't live up to that, then we don't deserve to succeed. The investor looked at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded, understanding that there was no changing his mind. With that, the owner turned back to the staff, his mind made up. "We're going to issue a public statement," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're going to apologize for what happened, not just today, but for any time a customer felt unwelcome in one of our stores. We're going to make it clear that this behavior has no place in our company." The employees listened intently, clearly unsure of what this would mean for them, but they could sense that something important was happening. "And we're going to change the way we do business," he continued. "From today, every employee will undergo mandatory training on customer service and inclusivity. We're going to make sure that every person who walks into one of our stores feels valued and respected, no matter who they are. This isn't just about fixing what happened today. It's about fixing the culture of our entire company." There was a moment of silence as everyone absorbed his words. Then slowly, there were nods of agreement. The manager, who had been at the center of the conflict, stepped forward, her voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said quietly. "I don't want this to happen again. Not here. Not anywhere." The owner smiled, appreciating her willingness to change. "We're all in this together," he said. "This isn't just about one store. It's about making sure we live up to the values we claim to have." But just when it seemed like the resolution was in sight, an unexpected twist emerged, a final, surprising revelation that no one had anticipated. As the owner was preparing to issue the public statement, a customer who had been quietly observing the entire situation stepped forward. She had been standing in the background, unnoticed until now, but as she approached, it was clear that she had something important to say. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "I've been a loyal customer of this brand for years, but I've experienced the same kind of treatment before. I've walked into several of your stores and been treated as if I didn't belong. It wasn't just today, and it wasn't just this store. It's been happening for a while." The room fell silent as her words sank in. The owner's heart sank further, realizing that the problem was even more widespread than he had thought. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a pattern. "I never said anything because I didn't think it would make a difference," the customer continued. "But after seeing what happened today, I realized that if we don't speak up, nothing will ever change. Her words hit the owner hard. He had thought he was addressing the issue, but now it was clear that the problem ran deeper than he had realized. It wasn't just a matter of retraining employees or issuing a statement. This was about the very foundation of his brand. The investor, who had been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward again. "This is bigger than just one store," he said quietly. "If this has been happening across multiple locations, we need to rethink everything from how we hire to how we train, even to how we market our brand." The owner nodded, his mind racing. He had built this company on the idea that luxury could be inclusive, that everyone deserved to feel special. But somewhere along the way, that message had gotten lost. Now, he had a chance to reclaim it, but only if he was willing to make real, lasting changes. Taking a deep breath, he turned to the customer who had spoken up. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Thank you for speaking out. Your experience matters, and we're going to make sure that no one ever feels unwelcome in our stores again." The customer nodded, clearly relieved that her voice had been heard. With the final piece of the puzzle now revealed, the owner knew what he had to do. He would overhaul not just the operations of the store, but the entire brand. He would launch a company-wide initiative to ensure that every customer, no matter who they were, felt valued and respected. He would rebuild the brand from the ground up, making sure that it truly lived up to the values it was founded on. As the owner prepared to issue the public statement, he felt a strange sense of calm. The crisis wasn't over, and the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. The final twist had revealed the true scope of the problem, but it had also given him a chance to make things right. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to fight for his brand, for the values it stood for, and for the people it was meant to serve. With a deep breath, he stepped outside the store, his phone in hand, ready to address the world. The story wasn't over yet, but this was the beginning of a new chapter 1, where he would rebuild not just his company, but the trust of every person who believed in it.